Hi guys, today we are going to continue with our EOC STAR review and focus on the founding fathers and founding documents of the United States, and then move on to our first unit of the year, the Gilded Age. On this first screen are some of the vocabulary terms that we need to remember about early American history. The first three items are the founding documents of the United States, kind of in this pinky red color: the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And the key thing is just for you to be able to tell the difference between those three documents. The Declaration of Independence is essentially the colonists' reasons for why they were fighting for independence from Great Britain. The U.S. Constitution was written in 1787 and it set up the basic structure for our national government that we still use today. And then the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Next on this list is Alexis de Tocqueville. You see that bright star next to him. He is important for you to know. He was a French political thinker, historian. He took a trip to early America and studied our politics and just our social nature, and returned to France and wrote a book identifying 5 characteristics that set America apart. And the 5 that he listed were liberty, egalitarianism, individualism, populism, and laissez-faire. And you can see their definitions right here. Again, those are the 5 characteristics that de Tocqueville identified when he looked at what makes America America. A lot of these we have talked about throughout the course. Laissez-faire, of course, being that hands-off approach to our economy. And then you have 2 mottos, E pluribus unum and In God We Trust. The In God We Trust phrase actually came about during the Cold War era, and it wasn't focusing on one specific God, but meaning more to reflect America's freedom of religion and emphasizing the fact that America in the Cold War era was better and more amazing because we had that freedom of religion that the Soviet Union did not have. On the next screen is a diagram going back over those founding documents and de Tocqueville's ideas. So if you need to go back and review and kind of fill in any gaps, you can look over some of these key phrases and terms that have to do with each. There's de Tocqueville again and his 5 key American values or characteristics. Now, the first era that we learned about this year in U.S. history was the Gilded Age. And so we're going to answer these 3 questions to reflect on that. How did big business dominate the Gilded Age? And we can say the Gilded Age was dominated by big business, by monopolizing companies and unfair, unethical business practices. Remember, we had that laissez-faire, hands-off philosophy, and so businesses grew without a lot of regulations. Some examples of those businesses from the Gilded Age that used these theories were steel, oil, and the railroad industry, especially remembering the Transcontinental Railroad. Naming the age. What does the Gilded Age mean? Gilded is a term that means things look grand or golden or great from the outside, but on the inside, things are very corrupt and unequal. Now with the Gilded Age, specifically, we're going to say examples that the immigrants believed in these grand ideas of America, but the reality of what they encountered when they arrived to the United States was very different. I often tell my students it's meaning kind of like gold plated. If you think about jewelry that is gold plated, it looks very, very fancy and grand. But when you put that gold plated ring on your finger and then take it off a couple hours later, you have that lovely kind of green tarnish ring around your finger. It's left a stain behind. And that's what we're talking about with the Gilded Age. How did the railroads spur industrialization? Again, we need to focus on the transcontinental railroad. The transcontinental railroad is the one that went coast to coast or east to west. It connected essentially New York City, the heart of the East Coast, to big cities on the West Coast like San Francisco. It was connecting goods and services across the country. And that spurred on industrialization, or the rise of factories and big business. The next page that we're going to look at is going to look at key terms from the Gilded Age. So there are 9 key terms for us to review, and you have your drag and drop on the right-hand side of this page, kind of as our word bank. So we're going to drag these over to fill them in. The principle of blank called for minimal government interference. This was one of de Tocqueville's 5 key parts or characteristics of the United States, and that is free enterprise. So we're going to drag free enterprise over. Remember, I'm going to add a little annotation. Free enterprise also equals laissez-faire, which also equals hands off. And that was the economic policy that dominated this time period. It's a little bit bigger for you guys. All right, number 2, the Pendleton Act was a major step towards blank. And we are going to pick the civil service reform. During the Gilded Age, it was basically a popularity contest. People got government jobs because of the friends that they had or who they knew. And that's always fun to be able to, hook your friends up with like, hey, I've got a job for you. But that doesn't mean they were qualified people to do the best job. And so with civil service reform, it put jobs in the hands of the people who are most qualified instead of the people based off of who their friends were or who they knew. Number 3, while it achieved some election success in the early 1890s, blank faded by the end of the 1800s. Look at our vocabulary terms. The one we are going to go with is populism, which was a movement really kind of for the people. The other thing we want you to remember is when you see populism, we want you to think the farmers. Typically, members of the Populist Party were farmers or represented the causes or the ideals and concerns of the farmers. Powerful bosses like William Boss Tweed of New York led blank that controlled governments in many states and cities. This is one of the defining things of the Gilded Age. We are looking for the term political machines. Y'all remember when we studied Boss Tweed, he essentially was the controlling force in New York City during this era. Through corruption, through deals, he would take care of immigrants, food, jobs for the lower class, but he expected them to vote for whoever he said to and do whatever he said in return. The blank, which gave the federal government the power to oversee railroads, was a major step towards regulating business. That is the Interstate Commerce Act. This was really one of the first regulations of any business in the United States. Number 6, the first blank railroad was completed in Utah in 1869, but other lines still followed. We've talked about this several times today. That is the Transcontinental Railroad that connected East Coast to West Coast. Number 7, the Dawes Act was an attempt to blank American Indians into white culture. We are looking for the phrase assimilate. And the Dawes Act is one of those that y'all tend to have a hard time remembering. The Dawes Act basically forced the Native Americans to assimilate. It took away reservations and most of the lifestyle that the Native Americans were used to. And the word assimilate essentially means a forced blending in the case of the American Indians. Took away their right to speak their languages and dress in any of their native dressings or practice their religions or whatnot. Number 8, the blank of Texas was boosted by the building of railroads, and that's going to be the cattle industry. All of those ranches that were far away could now be connected to the railway lines. And then lastly is the Homestead Act. And that provided free land to settlers of the Great Plains and really encouraged the growth of settlement in that area, eventually leading to the closing of the Western frontier, which was a significant moment in American history. All right, the last page that we are going to look at is going to identify some of the quotes. Who would be saying these phrases from the Gilded Age? So our first phrase, government should keep its hands off, laissez-faire, hands off business. So you've got some names of some of the big wealthy people of the time, but the best answer is going to be an industrialist. They would want to be able to run their business however they saw fit, and they would not want any government interference. Number 2, a good Christian looks out for the poor and the needy. The best answer for that one is going to be the social gospel movement. That if you were blessed with a big fortune, that you had a responsibility to kind of pay it forward and take care of those less fortunate than you. The third statement, we must regulate the railroads and reform them. Well, the farmers wanted the railroads to be reformed. And when we see populist, we need to think farmers. The farmers wanted to be charged fair rates. They didn't want to be taken advantage of by the railroad industry, and they wanted that to happen through government regulation. Number 4, those with wealth have an obligation to use some of that wealth for the common good. Well, is that Carnegie or is that Rockefeller? 2 of our original rich men. The best answer is Andrew Carnegie. He had tremendous wealth in his life, but he also believed in the social gospel, and he did a lot of philanthropy or giving back to others. Think Carnegie Hall, Carnegie Mellon Institute, there's libraries. He did a lot of giving back in his life. And then, of course, lastly, we must control the refining market to maximize profits. That would be John D. Rockefeller. Also very wealthy, but a very shrewd businessman. He ran the oil market in the United States, and so that he's talking about refining oil in this statement. The remaining pages have some more key definitions and vocabulary that you can review as you prepare for the EOC STAR test. A lot of these things that we talked about on these vocabulary pages. So if the Dawes Act didn't sound familiar, it's on here. If the Homestead Act wasn't familiar, the Interstate Commerce Act, we've got all of these things on here for you, as well as those 5 men that we talked about.